Welcome to our Succeeding with Forecast Pro webinar. In today's session, we will discuss overrides and external data. Hello and welcome to our webinar. My name is James Berry and I am the Director of Training here at Forecast Pro. I've been with the company now 23 years and I'll be walking you through our webinar today on external data. This is an ongoing webinar series that we run once every quarter. Our next webinar will be in November, and my colleague Franklin, who is monitoring the chat today, will post a link where you can sign up for our next webinar in this series. And this webinar, as with all of our webinars, will be recorded and we will post it on our website after today's session. And so if you want to go back and look at an archive of all of the previous webinars that we have performed, please feel free to do that. My colleague Franklin will also post a link to the previous webinars as well. Now, an important note, at the conclusion of this webinar, we will run a Q&A session where we will take your real questions. So please use the Zoom chat or the Zoom question and answer buttons that are in the Zoom meeting itself to post them. You can post them anytime throughout this entire webinar. Franklin will be monitoring them and will consolidate all of them at the end and we'll answer all of your questions live. So please, as we go, if you have any questions, type them out. We're happy to answer them for you. Now, with that said, let's go over the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to start with an overview. We will discuss some of the basic operations of bringing external data into Forecast Pro and the types of data that you will see. And then we will actually open up Forecast Pro and walk through several examples showing you how to utilize external data to the optimal way within the system itself. Once we've completed that demonstration, we will run some conclusions to talk about what we've seen today. And then, as I mentioned, we will end today with a Q&A session. So with that said, let's jump into our webinar. Let's begin with our overview. When developing a forecast, you're most likely to get feedback from at least one, but more likely multiple folks either at your company or externally from your customers. And the key to generating an accurate forecast is to incorporate all of this outside information into Forecast Pro to come up with a final consensus forecast. So we want to take this information and not only view it, but calculate off of it and potentially track accuracy against it, such that we're developing the best forecast possible. Now, what would this information look like? A common type of external data would be to convert from one unit to another. So for instance, if we want to convert from pounds to dollars or vice versa, or we wanted to convert from eaches to pack sizes, or we want to convert to linear feet, whatever the case may be, we may want to change units so that we're making adjustments in different units because different people may want to see things in different ways. For example, our salespeople, they may want to work in dollars, whereas our inventory planning folks, they may want to work in pallets. So again, having this ability to convert different units is very useful. We could also get alternative forecasts. One of the common ways we would do this is to get it from our customers. Maybe our customers will give you their forecast for what they're planning on buying from you. You want to incorporate this into your process, whether you're utilizing it directly or not. We want to see what our customers are thinking when we're making adjustments to our forecasts as well. Another alternative forecast would be a financial plan. Perhaps finance has developed an annual budget or plan for us going forward into the future, and so we want to compare that to our current forecasts as we go through time. This is another case where the conversions would come into handy. Maybe we're forecasting in units, and we convert to dollars to compare against this financial plan. We will actually see an example of this later in the webinar. Now, if we're on the operation sides, maybe we want to look at open orders or future orders that we've already booked. So I currently have a forecast for the next 3 months. I have orders for the next 3 months that have already come in. And if those orders are larger than my forecast, then I want to adjust my forecast up to be able to meet that demand. Again, we will look at an example of this a little bit later. So now that we've discussed some different types of external data we can get, how would this look in Forecast Pro itself? The most common place to look at this external data would be in our override grid itself. And so beyond just making overrides, we can see additional information. That includes our historic data, which we can stack on top of the current forecast. We can look at conversions, again, changing different unit types. We could look at our external data, whether those are external forecasts, our financial plans, or our open orders. We can see these as external rows. With these different data rows in here, we could then create calculated rows off of them. And finally, there are system rows of previous forecasts or alternative forecasts that Forecast Pro itself creates that we can use as well. Let's look a little bit more in depth at these, and we'll start with the conversions. So as we've already discussed, the most common type of conversion is to currency, whether that's changing units to dollars or euros or pounds or yen or whatever the case may be. This is very common. But we could also convert into other units, such as weight, whether that's pounds or kilos, or length if we're looking at raw materials, either linear feet or meters, or if we're doing inventory planning, we could do this in pallets or containers. So once again, seeing the data in different units, as well as being able to make adjustments in different units, depending upon whose feedback we're getting. Next, let's look at external data rows. Again, we've touched on some of these. These could be things like our open orders, any future orders that we have booked into the system. We could also see a financial forecast or budget that's been put into here. If we wanted to explicitly see price changes in the future, we could load in prices. We also mentioned that we might be getting forecasts from our customers, which we could load in here and compare against our current forecasts. Or even if we wanted to, we could look at back orders. So if we know we have all of these back orders piling up, we're eventually going to need to clear this out of the system and have a very large month of production in order to catch back up to fill in those back orders. And once we have all of this data in, we want to do a comparison between all of this information, and that's where the calculated rows come into play. With the calculated rows, we could create custom performance indicators if we wanted to. We could design what-if scenarios. We could use these to calculate alternative baseline forecasts, or we could even create our own custom conversions. There's lots of information here that we can compare any of these rows in the override grid to one another and create calculations off of them in this calculated row. And finally, there are the system rows controlled by Forecast Pro. Now, there are two specific system rows. There are the previous forecasts and the integer rounded forecasts. The previous forecasts are exactly what you would think. We can look at our forecast from last month or 2 months ago, and we can compare that against our current forecast in the system. And then obviously we could use the calculated rows to create a difference between these if we wanted to. The second type of system row is the integer rounding. Now, this is used primarily for extremely low volume data, so sub 1 unit per month forecasts. This is an alternative round, which is very useful for these very low volume data sets, and we'll take a look at one of these later in the session. Now that we've discussed what types of rows we can bring into Forecast Pro, let's see some examples of these in action. So we're going to be looking at 4 specific examples. The first will be a budget comparison. The second will be where we load in an alternative forecast. The third is where we'll look at open orders compared to our current forecast. And the fourth will be to use calculated rows to do a comparison year over year for growth or decline rates. So we'll start with our first example of a budget comparison. We're going to load in a financial forecast as an external row. We're going to load in conversions to convert our forecast from units to dollars, and then we'll be able to actually compare the two of these side by side to see how our forecasts are performing against one another. So here we are in Forecast Pro. For this example, as well as all 4 of our examples today, we're going to use our standard auto parts data. As you can see, it's a 5-level hierarchy, starting with our total. This then breaks down into our different regions. Our regions break down into different categories. The categories break down into different SKUs. And finally, the SKUs break down into the different customers. So it is a 5-level hierarchy. It is monthly. You can see it goes from July of 2023 through July of 2026. And we will be using this for all of our examples today. Here in our first example, we're going to compare our forecast in dollars to a financial forecast that we have loaded in. So we have our annual financial forecast, and we're going to compare that to our forecast in dollars. So this obviously requires that I load in 2 pieces of external data. I need to load in the conversion to convert from units to dollars, and I need to load in as external data our financial plan. And I do that through the data manager. So you can see here in the data manager, I have my conversion file. I also have my external data file. Now I've brought in a bunch of different external data files because we're going to look at these through all of our examples, but one of them is our financial plan that I have loaded in here. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can see I've added both of these to my override grid. So you can see my forecast here in units. I have my conversion into dollars, and then I have my financial plan. Now this is my 2026 financial plan, so you can see it ends in December of 2026. And if I scroll over here to the left, you can see it begins in January of 2026. So this external data covers both parts of the history and the forecast periods, but for a specific set of time, which is my 2026 period, so January through December over here. So I have this created, and I can see the 2 of these side by side. Now I have added them to my override grid, but I can also add them to my graph if I wanted to. So I can go ahead and right click on my graph and go to settings, and I can turn on my conversion in dollars as well as my financial plan over here, and we can turn these on in the graph. Now in doing so, you can see that these are on a very different scale than the history and the forecast, which are in units. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is turn off that history, and I'm going to turn off my forecast so that I'm looking at just the data in comparison in dollars, so I can see the 2 of these side by side. Now, one of the things, of course, that I would want to see, now that I can see them side by side, is where are the differences between the 2 of these? Where is my financial plan higher? Where is my forecast higher? So I want to see that. To do that, what I can do is create a calculated row here in the override grid itself. So I can go ahead and right click, and I can choose add a row. And this is going to allow me to create a calculated row. Now I have a couple of things that I need to choose. First, I need to choose whether this is a global or item specific calculated row. If it is global, this calculation will apply to all items in my hierarchy. Whereas if it's item specific, it becomes kind of a sandbox where I can put different formulas for each individual item. These rows will not reconcile, so they'll not roll up and down the hierarchies because obviously they're independent on an item by item basis. For my example, I want to compare these numbers across the entire hierarchy, so I'm going to keep it global. I also need to give it a name, and I'll just say a dollar comparison that we will have over here. So we'll have a dollar comp row. So I'll go ahead and say OK, and this will create my dollar comp calculated row. And so what I want to do is I want to actually come in here and put in a formula. So again, our formulas work like Excel. They're going to start with an equal sign, and we support certain formulas from Excel, things like sums, averages, min, maxes. We will see some more of these in the examples a little bit later in this webinar. I'm going to start with a very simple formula where I'm going to just take my forecast in dollars, and I'm just going to subtract off from my financial plan to see the difference between the 2 of these. And you can see here's the difference. My current forecast is 750 above my financial plan. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it across my data up through here. We'll paste this, and I can go ahead and commit it. And now you can see I have my calculation here for all of my data. Now this is a global row, so if I click on different items, you will see it will calculate for all of these. Now I do want to make a couple of changes to this. Obviously this is in dollars, and so what I can do is I can right click and go to my settings, and you can see here's my dollar comparison row. I want to change to red negatives because I want to see where I have negative values and highlight those. I'm also going to change the format of this from a number to a currency because this is obviously in dollars. I'm here in the US, so the default will be into dollars, but if I was working in other currencies, say euros, or if I was working in yen from Japan, I could change those as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now you'll see my row is now formulated into dollars. And I can see the red negative. So I can actually see the periods where my current forecast is lower than my budget. Now, if I encounter something like this, what I might want to do, how I'd actually utilize this information to make my forecast better, is say, look, my forecast is below my budget. I might want to actually raise it up. So you can see my financial plan says it's $40,539. I can come over here and in my value box, I could just make it equal to that. I could type 40,539 and go ahead and hit equals. You will see it will make the unit change that needs to happen. I'll go ahead and put in my comment and we'll say match financial plan. And we can go ahead and commit this. And it will make my change so that my forecast in unit changed, which changed my forecast in dollars to match, and now I have a zero change. So I now have no difference between the two of these. So I can go ahead and utilize this information, see where there are differences, and if I want to raise or lower my current forecast to match my budget, I can go ahead and do that in dollars using my conversions to match my external data, which is in dollars as well. So once again, I'm able to bring in this outside information that I can both see visually as well as use to make changes to make my forecast better. So now in our second example, we're going to look at an alternative forecast. We're going to load in one of our customer forecasts as an external row, and then we're actually going to replace the statistical forecast with that customer forecast, creating an alternative baseline forecast. And we'll see how this works and how you would implement it in the system. So here we are back in Forecast Pro, and in this example, we're going to load in a customer forecast as an alternative forecast and then set it as an alternative baseline. So as you can see in our data, we have 5 customers for each of our SKUs. We have CargoMaster, Nexus Supply, Optologics, PCA, and Warehouse Dynamics. Now, CargoMaster is one of our bigger customers, and they have provided us their forecast for what they see going forward. And we have loaded this as external data. You can see it here below that CargoMaster has sent us a forecast. Now, if we look at our other customers, there's nothing in here because obviously they're not CargoMaster. But any one of our CargoMaster customer nodes has an alternative forecast that has been loaded in because we received this from our customer. And what if, because they're such an important customer, whatever they say, that's what we're actually going to produce? We don't want to use Forecast Pro's numbers. We want to use CargoMaster's numbers. Now, we could load these forecasts in directly as overrides. However, that does have some downsides. One, it means it could be overwritten again by other people, and we could sort of lose this functionality of what the original CargoMaster forecast was. And second, by setting this as a baseline, which we'll show you in a minute, we can also track accuracy against the initial statistical forecast, this CargoMaster alternative forecast, and any adjustments we make on top of that. So in addition to keeping the visibility of what the initial CargoMaster forecast was, we can also use this to track accuracy, which is very useful down the road. So to assign this as an alternative baseline, you can see our current baseline for all of our items is our statistical. So what we want to do is we want to go into the settings of our override grid, and there's a baseline forecast assignment tab. Now you can see currently we have the default, which is our statistical, and every single item is checked for this. And so what we want to do is we actually want to find all of the CargoMaster items. So we can go here and use the filter and just type in CargoMaster, and it will give me a list of all of my CargoMaster customer item combinations. And I'm going to change this to my CargoMaster forecast. So I want to basically replace the statistical with the CargoMaster. Now we have a couple of, and to do this, I'm going to go ahead and say select all. and this will go ahead and select them. Now we do have a couple of other choices we have to make here. The first is that if CargoMaster didn't give us a forecast, what are we going to default to? We can either set it to 0, or we can just use the statistical going forward. The other thing we want to do is change the default source, which is that if we add any more items here, I want to go ahead and make sure that if new items get added and they get added to our CargoMaster forecast, that becomes the default going forward as well. So I can go ahead and say OK. So now, as you can see in my data, the default baseline has been changed to my CargoMaster forecast. Now, if I go to any other customer, you'll see they're still using the statistical as the baseline. So if I go anywhere else, you can see that, but any CargoMaster item is now using CargoMaster as the default baseline forecast. Now, the statistical has not been removed, so I can actually go over here to my settings, and I can say add or remove, and I can turn on my statistical, and it will appear down below. So I still have my statistical forecast here for all of my CargoMasters. It's still here. It's still being tracked in the project. And so if I look at my accuracy reports, I will still be able to compare the statistical versus the baseline, which is now CargoMaster, versus any of the adjusted numbers. So it's not gone, but I'm simply starting for all of my CargoMaster items with the CargoMaster forecast. And for every other customer, I'm using the statistical. So again, if you have large customers who are a big part of your business, especially if you do things like for big box retailers, or if you're using things like Amazon and they're the big part of your business for online, and you get their forecast, you may want to consider using this as an alternative baseline so that you can still track against the accuracy of the statistical versus the baseline, and still be able to make overrides if you want to this. So we'll have all three sets of data available to us to both see as well as track accuracy against. So for our third example, we're going to look at open orders. We will load in our open orders again as an external data row, and then we'll use our calculated rows to find areas where our open orders are actually larger than our current forecast. Thus, we already have orders booked that are higher than what we're forecasting, and we may need to raise our forecast because of this. Here in our third example, we're going to compare open orders to our current forecast. It's very common to have orders booked into the future, and that information be available to you when you're planning going forward, with the idea being that I might actually have orders on hand that are actually higher than my forecast, and that would actually lead to sort of back orders or eating into our safety stock. And so we would want to compare this information. So you can see here in my example, I have loaded open orders in as an external data row. I can see it here in the override grid, and I have graphed it. In a lot of cases, your open orders will be lower than your current forecast because these are orders in the future. They will most likely tail off as you go. But in some cases, like here in our Nexus supply, you can see our open orders for the next few months are actually higher than my current forecast. And again, this would lead to problems with inventory and production. So knowing this information, I would actually want to raise my forecast to be higher. And so one thing I could do is I can create a calculated row that will take the maximum of either my open orders or my current forecast. And so no matter what, I'm going to take whichever one is larger and create a series for that. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and right-click here on my row and add a row. This will be a calculated row. I do want it to be global because I want it to work everywhere. And I'm going to call this my max open orders versus forecast. And I can come in here and I'm going to go ahead and expand this a little bit. And we can use, as we mentioned, some of the formulas that we have available to us. And I'm going to go in here and say I want the max of my statistical and my open orders. And you'll see here, in my case, where my open orders are greater than my statistical, it's actually taking the open orders. And if I copy this, and I can paste it all the way across, go ahead and commit this, and you can see that now I'm taking the largest of my open orders versus my statistical. So here it's taking some of these. If I come over here to my other item, you can see that the statistical is actually greater for all of these periods. The same thing is true here, but if I were to go to this item, for instance, I actually have larger open orders going forward, so I will use that. And so I'm able to actually come in here and take whichever one is the maximum of these two. And one of the reasons that I would do this is I could then include in my output, instead of exporting my final forecast, I could export whichever one of these is larger. And I could then use, okay, what I'm going to pass back to my planning system is actually this row, which is the maximum of these two, as opposed to just exporting my final forecast. So I can use this as a point of comparison when I have information coming in to take whichever one is larger, thus making sure that I don't have situations where I have orders on hand that are greater than my current forecast, and I can plan for these accordingly. And for our fourth and final example, we're going to look at a year-over-year comparison. We're going to use the calculated rows to look at how our forecast compares to the same time last year, and if there are some major differences, whether they are growth rates or decline rates, that we need to focus on. For our fourth and final example, we're going to use calculated rows to compare the difference between our current forecast and what happened last year. Now, there's actually lots of different formulas that we can use to make this happen. And I want to show you the different examples of how we can do year-over-year comparisons. So to start, what we need to do is create a calculated row. So I'm simply going to right-click, and I'm going to say Add a Row. I want this to be a global row because I want it to apply to all of my items, and I'm just going to label it year-over-year. And this will be my calculated row down here. And so I can start with the simplest of formulas, where I can basically say, I want to say equals my current forecast, which is minus what I did last year. So you can see the formula. It's HistFC, this stands for history or forecast, minus the history 12 months ago. And we're using our relative position when it comes to generating this formula. We will see that we can actually use other formulas to do specific dates, but for now, we're just going to do a generic same time last year. And I'll go ahead and commit this. You can see the difference. I'll go ahead and copy and paste this for the rest of the year. We can commit this, and then we can actually see the unit differences from one year to the next. So right now I'm 99 units above last year, 133 above last year, etc. Now this is doing it in units, but I could also do this as a percentage. So I can come over here and just put these in parentheses, and then I could divide by the same time last year. Again, we can copy this and paste. Now you'll notice these all say 0 because again, this is no longer a unit, but a percentage change. And so what I would want to do is change this settings here for this row from a number to a percentage here as the format. And now I will actually see the percentage change. I'm up 14% from last year, 21%, etc. So if I wanted to look at a year-over-year change, I could do this as a unit, or I could do it as a percentage depending upon how I type the formula. And obviously when I type these formulas, I would want them to be formatted the way that I want. And again, this is a global report, so it will show you the changes for all of these. You can come over here, you can see these are 0% changes. You can see where I actually have some negatives, whereas over here I have some positive changes. So I can do that as well. Now you'll notice some of these can error out because I don't have a last year. So I could have made this formula a little bit smarter as well, where I could say, I could put an if statement and say if the history 12 months ago is greater than 0, then do my formula. Otherwise, we can put in a 0. And so I can actually figure out, go ahead and put this here. And now I can do a slightly more complicated formula that will actually compensate for the fact that I don't have data from the year before. So again, improving my formulas so that they are a little bit smarter, dealing with the fact that not all of our data has a year going back, and we can do something like that. Now, alternatively, I could do a cumulative total. So these are looking month by month, but I could also do a cumulative total. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and right click and add a new calculated row. We're going to call this year over year we'll call it cumulative. And what I can do is I can actually use our new date-specific formulas to make this work. So I can come over here in December and I can say equals the sum of my hist_fc, and then I can use a date range. So I can say 2026-1, so from January, through 2026-12. And this will give me a cumulative total. And this is the sum of my forecast for the last 12 months. And I can come over here and commit this. And so now I can have my cumulative total. Or I want to say what's the difference between that and the sum of the, in this case, the history from 2025-1 through 2025-12. And I can close all of these. And you can see I'm actually up 690 units from the year before. So I can actually see how am I actually doing year over year. I'm up 690 units, or again, I could turn this into a percentage if I wanted to. So one of the things we wanted to highlight is we now have this ability to do date-specific ranges. And if we wanted to create these date-specific ranges and put them in here, we can now use these in our formulas. And this is very, very helpful. It used to be very difficult to do kind of sums like this. You'd have to list every single month over and over again. But by doing this cumulatively, we're able to see what's the unit change year over year. And we can see this on any one of ours. You know, we're up 802. Some of these will be higher and some of these will be lower, but we can see this way. So again, we have this ability to create a cumulative total to say how are we doing, and again this is in units, but I could change this to a percentage if I wanted to. But this is very important because a lot of times folks are looking at their overrides and saying, look, we need to be up X percentage from this year to next year, or we should be down this much from this year to next year. And being able to do these cumulative totals or these month-over-month comparisons is very, very useful, and again can help us when making our adjustments. Now we're going to discuss some conclusions from this webinar. Okay, so what did we cover in today's webinar? We saw that most people will receive a variety of different data from a variety of different sources that we'll want to consolidate in Forecast Pro to use to produce a better, more accurate forecast. We looked at these different types of data, as well as our functionality like the calculated rows and the historical data that we can see within Forecast Pro itself that we utilize to create the best forecast possible. And that's really what today's webinar was all about. How can we take this outside information, bring it into the system, and use it to produce the best forecast possible? Now, a few housekeeping notes. We did use the latest version of Forecast Pro Track, version 8.3, to utilize all the functionality that you saw today. If you would like to see a demonstration of this, if you don't have Forecast Pro Track, you don't have the latest version, we would be happy to produce a live demo using your real data. These are usually 60 to 90 minute sessions, and we'd be happy to help you with those. If you do have Forecast Pro and you want to see this functionality with your real data and you want to schedule some live training, I'm happy to help with that. Obviously, that is my primary role here at Forecast Pro. So if you would like to schedule some real in-person live training, we can do that. Please contact myself or Franklin, who's monitoring this chat. He is also a trainer here, and we'd be happy to help you with that. And as we mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, this is an ongoing series. Our next webinar will be in November, and if you would like to sign up for that, Franklin will be placing a link in the chat where you can sign up for that, as well as any event in the future. We do have an events page. Franklin will post the events page as well for you to look at if you want to see any future events, or if you want to review any past events that we have done. Again, we have an archive of all of these webinars. You can feel free to browse those as well. And now to conclude this webinar, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a Q&A session. Hopefully you've been typing in your questions as you've been watching the webinar. If not, now's your chance. Again, please use the chat functionality built into Zoom to type in your questions. Franklin will consolidate all of those now, and I will try to answer them live for you. So again, thank you for attending the webinar, and now let's get to your questions.